Welcome to another episode of the ONPHA Opening Doors Podcast. This is the podcast where we dive into the bigger issues shaping community housing here in Ontario. Thank you for joining us as we open doors to housing solutions and stronger communities. I'm Marlene Coffey, the CEO of the Ontario Nonprofit Housing Association, and I'll be your host today. Today's topic is really important. With Ontario's provincial election happening on February 27 and a federal election on the horizon, now is a critical time for advocacy in the community housing sector. Advocacy is at the heart of building a stronger, more sustainable sector. But how do we make sure our voices are heard and that real change happens? In today's episode, we're diving into how ONPHA gathers intelligence, builds relationships with decision makers, and champions policies to support the community housing sector in Ontario. Plus, we'll share some practical advocacy tips and key election messages that can help you make an impact. Today, I'm joined by a guest and a valued partner with StrategyCorp. ONPHA has been working closely with StrategyCorp for years to strengthen our advocacy efforts and support our members, especially as we tackle challenges like the end of mortgage and ensuring long-term sustainability in the sector. And so I'm pleased to welcome today Liam Thompson. He's a government relations consultant with StrategyCorp. And Liam helps clients across many sectors, including housing, and understands how to navigate complex regulations and shifting the political landscape. He also brings a wealth of knowledge and experience from the government relations and political side. So welcome, Liam, to our podcast today. I am so glad that you're able to join us.
Thank you very much, Marlene, and it was a great introduction. I'm very excited to be on the podcast. We've been working together for many years now, but it's my first time to chat with you on the podcast, so I'm excited for our discussion today.
Thank you, Liam. I know we speak often, and we're very familiar with our work, but I do want to shout out to our membership and our audience today to really talk about how ONPHA gathers our insights and how we inform our advocacy that our members often see in our communications. So I just want to take a quick step back and talk about our partnership with StrategyCorp and how you help us stay informed and strengthen our advocacy efforts. So my first question to you is, what strategies have helped ONPHA gain traction with government decision makers in the past?
For sure, Marlene, and maybe I'll just take a step back and talk about our relationship between StrategyCorp and ONPHA, because I think that's really the key to the success in my eyes. And I know we've been working together for a number of years, which predates my time here at StrategyCorp, but I've been here working with you for almost 3 years now, and I think it's the collaboration between our two organizations really helps make a holistic view of ONPHA's advocacy. I know in our weekly meetings, we're, engaging the comms team, the policy team, and the advocacy team, along with our StrategyCorp insights. So we're really getting a holistic picture, and it ensures we're all singing from the same songbook and helps us, work towards our goals that we set together as ONPHA and StrategyCorp.
Yeah, so really being integrated as two organizations and having regular meetings is one of the things that we do between our organizations. And I know you as an organization and you as a person have a lot of insight and experience. So I'm wondering if you could share with us, how do you stay ahead of emerging trends so that we're not always looking backwards, but we're actually projecting forwards? Do you have any tools that you can speak about?
For sure. So I think one, even just from an organizational standpoint, obviously StrategyCorp has a ton of different members on our team, and a lot of bright minds who have done great things in both government and government relations, working, federal and provincial across party lines. So not only do they have a wealth of knowledge, but they have a wealth of connections and understanding in just government decision making. So they're really able to dictate, what's a strategic move for, party X or party Y, and what would the next move be for them, whether it be a policy rationale or a political rationale. And I think that really helps us understand what government's looking for and really anticipate. Kind of, I guess, for a hockey analogy, like Wayne Gretzky, anticipating where the puck's going to be rather than following it around. And I think that really helps, dictate our government advocacy with ONPHA and StrategyCorp.
So shaping our ideas is not always linear. I can tell you from the ONPHA side that we have 7 or 8 different sources that we use to inform and shape our thinking and what the future might look like in terms of our own advocacy. And so us talking to members and making sure that we hear the membership voice, as well as our own governors, our ONPHA board of directors, are 2 examples where we have very close relations to really engage and hear and inform ourselves. So how might you do this internally within your own organization?
For sure. So I think within our organization, obviously there's individuals with different expertise. My colleague who couldn't join us today, Luke, worked in MMAH and designed a lot of the programs that we're advocating on. So it's really nice to tap into, his knowledge and his understanding of the actual intent behind the legislation that, and regulations that really either, hinder and restrict community housing or that will allow it to grow. So I think just, different relationships like that allow us to really understand the intent of government regulations and then government legislation. But also outside of StrategyCorp and as ONPHA said, just engaging the membership of ONPHA to hear from the ground what's impacting members, and as well as other, sister or brother organizations who are in the community housing space, whether it be in a different province or nationally. I think it's important to gather news from a whole bunch of different sources, as you said, Marlene, and put it together to get a, wholesome picture of, what the landscape is today and what it's looking like for tomorrow.
Right. So connecting with members is key to building our intelligence and informing and shaping our advocacy. We also work with other organizations, sector associations, for example, that might help amplify our advocacy efforts. Can you talk to us a little bit more about your work across broader networks and broader sectors?
For sure. I think with ONPHA, we've engaged, other community housing organizations, within the space of, nonprofit or community housing across Canada. And I think, as you said, Marlene, when we're all on the same page and, we're all speaking the same messaging, it makes our voice stronger and it, shows a united front to the government on, what policies or change that we want to see. But also we've been expanding with even just private developers, looking for ways that private and nonprofit partners can, partner up together and, make developments, cut down barriers, find innovative ways to get, both housing and affordable nonprofit community housing built at the same time.
So, Liam, I have to say that we spoke not too long ago with the ONPHA Board of Directors at our last board meeting. And the feedback that I got from the ONPHA board was that they were really impressed with how sophisticated and in depth our research is and our connections are in order to help inform and shape our advocacy. And so I want to talk a little bit more about the government relations piece and how this might work for us. So we know, of course, that there is a distinction between advocacy and government relations, and ONPHA does put a lot of emphasis on the relations part because that's really where we have the power of influence. So could you talk to us from your experience what exactly government relations are and why is it important?
For sure. And maybe I'll start with why it's important, because it's a little bit of a passion of mine and why I got into politics in the first place. But government decisions impact every organization in every sector, whether it be the private sector, nonprofit sector, or charities, right? Government legislation and regulation can really change the whole landscape in which you operate. So it's definitely important. And there's not one single sector that's not impacted by government. So my passion to get into, government relations is really to understand how the government can facilitate an environment that, allows for success in both the private and nonprofit sectors. So in terms of its importance, I think it's one of the most important things. And I think that's why in organizations, across Canada, we're seeing, government relations departments being developed and, a big focus from organizations focusing on government relations as they move forward. But in terms of what it actually is it's kind of boiling it down into really advocating on behalf of an organization to try and influence whether it be public policy or government decision making. And it takes a whole bunch of different forms. And as you alluded to, Marlene, just grassroots advocacy, from cultivating support on the ground and whether it be petitions, etc., to more targeted, higher, like top-down lobbying, where you're targeting specific individuals with, clear and concise messaging on how to align and how to advance policy goals, whether that be an issue or a solution to an issue. So I think there's a whole bunch of different forms to government relations, but it's definitely something that's very important.
Are there challenges within that? So influencing government sounds like a very big ambition. I imagine there are some challenges, especially in the community housing sector. We know, but I'd like for you to share with our membership and our audience a little bit.
For sure, right? There's no, secret sauce or special serum that can, snap a switch and have successful government relations. And I think with ONPHA, there's two real challenges that I've noticed. The first being kind of a lack of understanding of community housing, or even a stigma, and sometimes with the key decision makers that we're engaging. And it's really unfortunate that we almost have to start from the beginning on explaining, what is community housing. It seems a lot of times in the decision makers' eyes, there's either market housing and then, homelessness, encampments, and emergency shelters. So they don't really see that whole middle ground and, the lower end of market, affordable rentals, etc., that community housing really is. So I think a big challenge has been trying to portray community housing how we see it and how the reality is versus how the government perceived, like the preconceived notions that government decision makers have on it. And then the second one really has been just a change in personnel. And as you alluded to, Marlene, at the top of the podcast, it's a very hectic time in terms of politics. We have a provincial election right now. The prime minister stepped down and there might be a federal election on the horizon. But, we're engaging with, different ministers all the time who've taken over the portfolio. And with that comes with a whole bunch of different staff. So we almost have to start with the basics over and over again, just as we're gaining traction in terms of advocacy. And I think just off the top of my head, I know provincially we had, Minister Clark, Minister Calandra, Minister Flack, Minister Tangri, and now we have Minister Thanigasalam as well. And then federally, Minister Hussein, Minister Fraser, and now Minister Erskine Smith. So it's almost been musical chairs in terms of the housing portfolio, both at the federal and provincial governments. But obviously, it doesn't take away from our advocacy. It just makes it a little more challenging in terms of informing all of the new decision makers.
Right. And this is part of the beauty of issues-based advocacy is that our work resonates in all communities, with all leaders, with all candidates, as we build those relations, which can be beyond the political relation. I do have to say that we build relations in many ways. The political environment is one, but there are also some very successful leaders on the administrative side that we work very closely with. So can you talk to us a little bit about what makes for successful relations?
For sure. Maybe I can start with what makes for successful relations and then kind of dive into what we've done with ONPHA. But really, I think what makes successful government relations is having a strategy. And at the basis of the strategy is understanding how government decision making happens. And to me, there's really three key considerations for government decision makers. The first being, what are the government's priorities? And these are often listed out, whether it be a platform, a budget submission, mandate letters to different ministers. And it really says, we hope as the government to accomplish X, Y, and Z. So if you're able to tie in your advocacy, not only are you helping your organization, but you as an organization are helping the government achieve their mandate by matching it up to whether it be a platform commitment or a budget commitment or a mandate letter. So that's kind of the one side of things. The second is really political rationale. And at the end of the day, politics is about getting reelected as well as decision making. So as they're making these decisions, it has to really think about, how is this going to help with my electorate? How is this going to impact my chance at reelection? Maybe it's a great policy, but it'll, really hurt my chance at reelection. And that's something that they'll have to consider. Or maybe, there's a win-win where they can release a, policy that's very sound and helps, community housing providers, and also helps them in terms of their reelection with their electorate. And then, the last one is really the complexity of the solution and or issue. Politics is only 4 years, and, these governments want to try and accomplish as much as they can in those 4 years. So sometimes those more complex issues fall by the wayside, just because, you can accomplish 5 or 6, lower hanging fruits versus, one complex issue that may take some more time and, a lot more energy or cost to solve those issues. So it's really understanding how these decisions are made, and then tying in advocacy to make sure it aligns with that, right? As I always like to say with another analogy, is it's like in grade school when you get the rubric on, this is what the teacher is looking for. If we already have that by knowing what the government is looking for in their decision making, we can try to align on all of those things rather than, going around in the dark.
Again, from your experience, Liam, what can community housing providers do in this election season to have impact locally?
For sure. I think there's a few things that they can do. And one, as we've kind of been alluding to throughout the podcast, is really to engage candidates in a nonpartisan manner. So I would reach out to each of the candidates across party lines, whether you invite them for a tour. We find when you bring the politician to the community housing space, one, those are potential voters for the politician. Two, they look at, facts on a page and they see and read about community housing. But when they actually go there and tour through the facility, they gain a deeper understanding of what community housing is and who you serve. And we find that very effective in terms of engaging with future and current decision makers. And the second thing is to really rely on ONPHA. They have all of the materials there for you, and just go through their website or reach out. I think they have the materials, whether it be key messages, draft letter templates, all sorts of things that will help you guide your government relations advocacy at the local level. Because at the end of the day, all politics is local. So if you can build champions within your own riding and within your own community, I think that's how we get a bigger chance of success. And when all members do that across the 124 ridings in the province, the ONPHA message is loud and clear, and all government decision makers will know it.
That's a great shout out to our membership. So thank you very much. And I encourage everyone to follow up and have a look at the resources that we have built for you. So final question, as we're just in this theme, is really moving beyond the election into sustained advocacy with governments. How can we bring housing providers into that more so? Or how can they do that more so?
For sure. And I think it starts, again, with the local, not even just with the, MPs and MPPs, but also councillors. Again, a lot of these decisions, whether it be, housing crosses all 3 levels of government. We're talking about permits and all those sorts of things on the municipal side, maybe funding from, the federal and provincial side, but it's really important to start with those local champions. So engaging your MP, your MPP and councillor, and, really outlining the struggles that you have and some potential solutions are an effective way to start. And as well as, building those long-term relationships. You want to have champions at the decision-making table. And it all starts, it's not a snap of the fingers, as we said. Marlene, we've been working for years and years, and we're starting to see the fruits of our labor in terms of, the government maybe reaching out to us to, bounce an idea off us and understand ONPHA's expertise on an issue or a matter. So I think it starts really slow, but it sort of snowballs. And as you have all of your membership doing that across all of the 124 ridings in Ontario, it really helps gain traction on the advocacy and build champions within government.
So we do invite community housing providers and those who are around us to join ONPHA in membership. It really does help us strengthen our voice and be heard as a sector as we're engaging with decision makers. Liam, we have some really strong pillars that we've been living with for a few years in terms of our key advocacy, key messages being build, protect, and support. I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the work that we did together in terms of how we built those pillars and why they continue to resonate.
Sure, and I think to start with the how, it really was based on, feedback of the key issues that are impacting the housing providers of your membership. So we took kind of, the issues that are impacting them on a day-to-day basis, and really that's the how. In terms of the why, it really is a focus to engage cross-party all parties in terms of an election. This really fits the build, protect, support are three key priorities to build more housing, protect the current stock of housing that we have, and support the tenants and the housing providers in the community housing sector. So I think it really can be tailored to fit the needs and mandate, as we've talked about, and the key priorities of every major party. And another thing that we've done with this is we really designed it as almost, I like to say, as a menu in terms of understanding the current economic and fiscal situation that we're in terms of Ontario and Canada. And it, provides an option for, lower cost solutions and some higher cost solutions. But all of the issues and priorities that we're advocating on are impacting the housing providers on a day-to-day basis.
So we've spoken a lot about how those three pillars can live in different ways depending on the audience that we're speaking to. They are open enough that they're open to interpretation and some flexibility, but specific enough that we can bring in some real life examples under each of those pillars depending on the audience. So being nonpartisan is absolutely essential to us as an organization. We're more than 30 years old. It is always very important for us to maintain and ensure that we're relevant as we continue to build relationships with decision makers, party leaders, and governments. So talk to us a little more around how those pillars are relevant depending on how we shift within different audience in a nonpartisan way.
For sure. I think one of the objectives of our advocacy with ONPHA is to be, as we always say, a practical expert, right? We're not partisan. We have great relationships with the, conservative government in Ontario, and we have great relationships with the Liberals federally, and all of the opposition parties within those levels of government. So I think we've done a great job at being nonpartisan at ONPHA, but really focusing on practical solutions that work. And it's just a matter of getting that buy-in in terms of the, key political and mandate priorities of the governments. But maybe just one example is just capital repairs. We definitely understand and we hear from membership. Ontario's housing stock, community housing stock, is one of the oldest in all of Canada. It was built between the 60s and 80s and it's in dire need for repair. And as we always say, repairing units aren't as sexy in terms of getting you new unit counts and stuff that you can do a press release for and a ribbon cutting as a government, but they're very, very important. So on one hand, you can do it because we need to, and out of the goodness of our hearts for tenants and providers who operate them. And on the other hand, we can repair the units to increase the asset value, to allow it to be leveraged for future expansion. So there's a bunch of different ways in which we can present these priorities, but at the end of the day, they're based on the feedback from membership on what they're experiencing day to day, and they're a focus of us to advance the sector moving forward.
And I have to say that we are more than half of the country's community housing stock right here in the province of Ontario. We are a major influencer within the federal landscape. And of course, as we look at the Ontario landscape, our own ONPHA membership is 30% of community housing stock in the country just here in the ONPHA membership, and of course 5% of all housing real estate in the province of Ontario. So it's more than the greater good. We are talking about assets and operating like businesses and making sure that the community housing sector is sustainable into the long term. because the service that we deliver on the ground in the community is absolutely essential to vibrant and vital communities.
Sure. And I think, Marlene, you just touched on a great point. But even when we go into these meetings with government officials, and as we've talked about having to reintroduce ONPHA to all the new ministers and staff, but everyone's shocked at the sheer magnitude of ONPHA and community housing, especially in Ontario. So I think, we are a big player. We have great practical priorities. We have great practical solutions. And we're experts in the field. And I think government is slowly coming around to understanding that. And that's why they're starting to reach out to us for solutions.
And the three pillars fit federally and provincially. So yes, we're a provincial association. Our mandate is to work with the provincial government on behalf of the community housing sector. But we also engage with the federal government because there is a relationship there as we look at interprovincial transfer payments and so on. It all ends up playing out on the ground in our very own sector. And so we continue to live with those advocacy pillars. We believe that they will resonate as we continue our work and really deepen the ability to influence on behalf of the sector. My final question to you, Liam, as we're in this podcast, I know that's the first time we've done this particular format together. What inspires you most in terms of working in the community housing sector?
That's a good question. I think it's the resiliency and entrepreneurship. I think, honestly, coming in with not too much knowledge of community housing, I had a bit of that stigma that the government did. But after engaging membership, and attending conferences over the years, seeing all the advocacy materials, and just the sheer magnitude that you have at ONPHA, housing over 500,000 Ontarians, with close to $30 billion in built assets, it really dawned on me that this is a massive developer. These aren't just mom and pop shops necessarily, but it really is. You know how to stretch dollars, you know how to work with thin margins, and you're also doing a social good. So I think that's really my favorite part of community housing and why I see it being a long-term solution for the housing crisis that we're in right now.
Great answer. And thank you so much for being with us today. I really, really appreciate your insight and your talent and your wisdom and how you work with ONPHA as we build our advocacy strategy and particularly our government relations work. Couple of thoughts as we're just closing off here. I did hear some really strong messages in terms of how we build and shape our advocacy lines, that there's lots of depth and insight into building strategies. I also heard from you the importance of that two-way relationship. So what can we do for them? What can they do for us? And it's in finding that very special place in terms of a win-win that we can really strengthen strategies and have impact in our collective government relations. I also heard about a little distinction between the political arm and the side of government support on the administrative side, and how having relationships on both sides of the fence is equally important, particularly as we're looking to long-term relationships and deepening the advocacy we do. And of course, that everyone has an opportunity to influence locally. They can get involved. They can share our united voice and our key messaging. Add to that through your own support and reaching out to your local candidates, your local representatives, and offering to give candidates a tour of your organization and really sharing the very important and good work that all of you do in the sector. So thank you so much, Liam, for being with us today, for sharing what you have. And I very much look forward to our continued government relations work.
For sure. Thank you very much for having me, Marlene. It was a pleasure.
Once again, everyone, you can visit onpha.on.ca/elections, and there will be resources for you to take away and action today. And before we wrap up, I'd like to highlight a couple of exciting upcoming events that will help you stay informed and engaged in the ongoing conversation about housing and advocacy. Coming up on April 9th, we have the ONPHA Sector Summit. So please make sure that you stay tuned and sign up and join us at the summit for our continued updates to you. Also, we have the 2025 ONPHA Conference, October 30 to November 1 in this year, 2025, in Toronto. We are among the largest housing events in North America, bringing in over 1,000 housing professionals and policymakers into a 3-day conference and networking, learning, and actioning programming. So stay tuned for registration, which will be opening soon. Thanks again, everyone, for listening and for being with us today.